Have you ever thought about how online spaces, maybe places you go to escape, can sometimes, well, lead you down paths you never expected, maybe even harmful ones?
It's a really potent idea, and today we're looking into that, specifically how online anonymity seems to both liberate people, but also seriously distort perspectives.
Yeah, and we're drawing from excerpts from Elle Reeve's book, Black Pill, How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics. It's quite a title.
It is, and the book gives this very raw, unfiltered look at how these online subcultures grow, how they spread, and the impact they have, in the real world.
Exactly. We'll be looking at specific stories and ideas in the book. Our goal here isn't to endorse any of the, frankly, often politically charged views in it, but just to understand the dynamics Reeve is reporting on.
Right, just presenting the information as it appears in the source. And actually, before we jump in, it's worth mentioning a YouTube channel called Mindful Moments.
You're right.
They use AI for book analysis, really encouraging that kind of reflection and critical thinking. It's a good mindset to have, especially for navigating material like this.
Definitely a good mindset. Okay, so let's start with something Reeve shares from her own life, way back when she was 14.
This story about her neighbor.
Yeah, this neighbor acting really unsettlingly towards her family, watching the house late at night, harassing her parents verbally.
And what's striking isn't just the neighbor's behavior, but Reeve's own internal reaction. Her parents were, documenting everything legally.
Right, but her father found her diary, and she'd written about this really disturbing encounter with the neighbor at the bus stop.
And her internal thought was, try it, bitch. I mean, at 14, it shows this incredible self-possession, but also this deep anger.
She talked about her dad teaching her self-defense, like really graphic stuff. And she knew she was physically capable. She's a gymnast, strong, agile, high pain tolerance.
It's such a powerful personal anecdote right at the start. It really sets a tone.
It really does. It highlights how these even negative personal experiences can forge this unexpected inner strength.
Yeah.
She reflects later that dealing with this exact kind of man as a teen actually prepared her more for hostile environments as a journalist than any professional training did.
That's a key insight, isn't it? How our formative years, the things we overcome, or even just process internally, can shape us in ways we don't foresee. It gives her a unique lens for viewing the online spaces she investigates later.
Okay, so let's shift to online phenomena. Pepe the Frog
Yeah.
starts as this simple cartoon character.
Right. Feels good, man.
And then it just explodes. It becomes this ubiquitous internet meme. But its journey is wild. You see it on far-right banners. Richard Spencer wore it on his lapel.
Even, wasn't there a tweet from a Russian embassy featuring it? And the Anti-Defamation League adds it to their list of hate symbols.
Exactly. The creator, Matt Fury, tries to reclaim it, even kill it symbolically. But then crypto guys sort of reanimate it, leading to lawsuits. It's just amazing how one image can be twisted into so many different meanings.
It really shows how fluid online symbols are. Their meaning isn't fixed by the creator. It's dictated by the communities that adopt and, weaponize them sometimes. It's vulnerable to hijacking.
A perfect example of how online communication evolves so rapidly, sometimes in pretty troubling ways.
And it connects to broader ideas floating around. Like Joe Rogan mentioned Kali Yuga on his podcast.
Right, this Hindu concept of cycles of time. The idea that weak men lead to hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and suggesting we're in the weak men era now.
Yeah, and Reeve connects this sort of thinking, this sense of decline, to the concept of the black pill. Should we unpack that a bit?
Let's do it. What is the black pill in this context?
Well, building on that feeling of societal decay, the black pill, as Reeve lays it out, is this belief that society is fundamentally built on lies. Taking the black pill means you supposedly see the harsh, unvarnished, often nihilistic truth underneath it all.
And the danger is how that gets used, right?
Exactly. If you believe the whole system is corrupt and false, then, anything goes. Cruelty, violence. It can all be rationalized as necessary to tear down the lies.
Reeve points out that harm caused to others is dismissed because those people are seen as still, deluded. Any chaos created is actually seen as a good thing, a step towards ending the correct regime.
It fosters this real sense of superiority and detachment. Empathy evaporates because others are just part of the broken system. It's a pathway to dehumanization.
It's a really dangerous mindset. Weave then brings us into the world of Wizard Chan through its admin, Fred.
And his relationship with Anna. This is quite a story.
Anna was specifically attracted to virgins, to men who were awkward and nervous about sex. She found it erotic, apparently frequented incel communities, almost relating to their outsider status.
It's definitely unconventional, and her approach was so transactional. She told Fred straight up that their sexual relationship had an expiration date tied to his virginity.
Yeah, he said she told him, we're going to have sex maybe 10, 20 times, maybe even fewer if he got confident too fast. He was 19 and just, in his words, dumbfounded by that level of frankness.
It really underscores the sheer variety of desires and dynamics that play out online. But Fred's side is crucial too. He found these forums because he felt like an outcast offline due to his disability.
So the internet was a refuge.
A refuge, yes, but also a place where he encountered really negative ideas about himself. That duality, refuge, and source of harm keeps coming up.
Then he finds 4chan, and he describes being mesmerized by the offensive language, slurs against disabled people he'd never heard in real life.
And he admits to a perverse satisfaction in reading them online. That's quite disturbing.
It really is. It speaks volumes about online anonymity, doesn't it? Encountering extreme hate speech, maybe even becoming desensitized because the real-world consequences aren't there.
Exactly. Which makes his goal for Wizard Chan so interesting.
Right. The complete opposite. He wanted it to be a sanctuary for virgins. Strict rules. No talking about sex or relationships. No discouraging the wizard lifestyle. He envisioned it like modern-day monks.
Trying to build a positive community around a shared circumstance, framing it as a choice, almost like monasticism, contrasting sharply with the nihilism often found in incel spaces. It shows how the rules and framing of an online space really matter.
But then Anna, who was initially drawn to Fred and that world, she ends up taking the black pill herself.
Even though she apparently found it horrible.
Yeah, she contrasted it with the red pill, which she saw as more about psychological games, believing cruelty works in dating. For her, the black pill was just utter fatalism. Like she said, if you're ugly, it's over.
Her journey from observer to believer, even while seeing its negativity, really shows the seductive power these ideologies can have, especially for people feeling marginalized. The black pill offers a simple, albeit brutal, explanation for their struggles.
It's just bleak. Reeve also touches on the role of older, often wealthier men in these movements.
Providing money and maybe some kind of validation, even if they seem out of touch or manipulative sometimes.
Yeah, like Bill Regnery from a prominent conservative family. Reeve includes an email where he talks about reading Dylan Roof's manifesto after the Charleston shooting.
And his reaction.
He was apparently flabbergasted that it seemed so intelligent, or at least coherent. It highlights this strange disconnect, this surprise that someone holding such hateful views could also articulate them.
Which ties into a broader point Reeves makes later, doesn't it? About the assumption that intelligence equals virtue.
We'll definitely circle back to that. But first, there's another striking example of shifting norms within extremism. A former skinhead.
Oh, the Stormfront meme story.
Yes, he sees a meme on Stormfront, the white supremacist site, showing a beaten white woman, and other alt-right members are defending it as ironic.
And he's shocked, right, because in his skinhead days, that kind of imagery would have provoked immediate violent anger, not justification or irony.
Exactly. Yeah, it shows how the online-driven alt-right maybe had different boundaries or used irony in a way that older extremist groups didn't.
It points to a kind of desensitization or maybe a different function for provocative content. Let's talk about Jeff Shoup. His path into this world is also quite revealing.
Starts innocuously, doesn't it? Yeah. He encounters this seemingly harmless elderly woman at a booth.
Which turns out to be a front, a gateway to racist groups. And he joins the National Socialist American Workers' Freedom Movement, the NSM, at 19.
19. So young. And later, he and others tried this stunt in Minneapolis.
The swastika flag incident.
Yeah, displaying a swastika flag downtown, basically to prove they could do it without facing violent consequences. The aim was to show potential recruits that they could be openly extremist without immediate danger.
Trying to build confidence, lower the barrier to entry, make extremism seem less risky.
But Shoup also saw real violence within the movement. He knew people who committed horrific acts, like Buford Furrow, the LA Jewish Community Center shooter, and Jeff Hall, a fellow NSM leader killed by his own son.
So he wasn't naive about the potential for violence, yet later on he expresses disillusionment specifically with the alt-right.
Right. He found their obsession with Pepe the Frog bizarre, and he noted this deep-seated hatred for women that he felt was different or maybe more central than what he'd seen in the older hard-right groups.
Interesting distinction, and this brings us to the language used in these spaces, particularly on 4chan, the term oddist.
Used almost interchangeably as like an insult and a term of endearment or group identity.
And the concept of weaponized autism,
which refers to that obsessive deep-diving internet research often used for malicious purposes like doxing, right?
Exactly. And alongside that, the term normies for, well, basically anyone neurotypical or holding mainstream political views.
Reeve connects this to specific figures like Matt Parrott and Christopher Cantwell, suggesting they both had experiences consistent with autism spectrum disorder and found their way into extremism partly through the internet.
And Matthew Heimbach, another figure we'll discuss, apparently stated bluntly that the alt-right is actually a movement of autistic guys with internet access.
It's a provocative claim. Let's look at Parrott's background. He was into computers early on, won a coding competition, got a laptop.
And then he discovers The Bell Curve, the controversial book about race, intelligence, and class structure. That had a big impact on his thinking.
And Heimbach. His story involves a history professor who saw him as searching for a father figure and being infected with this hatred.
Heimbach then starts a white student union at Towson University and gets involved with Youth for Western Civilization. Reeve points out how mainstream conservative groups sometimes unwittingly provided platforms or legitimacy for individuals who later became central to the alt-right.
A sort of pipeline, almost. Now, back to Parrott. He and his then-wife, Connie, were involved in online fundraising.
And there were complexities around Connie's health issues, accusations they were scammers.
Heimbach apparently had a very negative view of Connie, believing she exaggerated or even caused her health problems for attention. But Parrott defended her, citing a promise he'd made to God.
It paints a picture of really complicated, messy personal lives behind the public-facing ideology.
Definitely. And Parrott himself wrote about white pathology, feeling white people were facing a soft genocide. But there's this stark contradiction between his advocacy for traditional families and the eventual collapse of his own marriage.
Evan McLaren, who was involved in white nationalism for a time but later disavowed it, apparently identified Parrott as someone who could have been a great guy, if not for the movement.
Shows how ideology can twist potential, maybe. The story around Connie gets even darker, though.
The request for heroin, the talk about assisted suicide.
Yes, and this surreal death party they apparently held, only for Connie to change her mind afterwards.
Just incredibly bleak and chaotic.
And after Connie left him, Parrott spirals into what Reeve calls a black-pilled depression, getting more involved in white power events with Heimbach.
It sounds like a cycle of personal despair fueling ideological extremism and vice versa.
Let's revisit that point about intelligence. Reeve observes that many smart, decent people find it hard to accept that, well, many Nazis are also intelligent.
Because there's this underlying assumption that intelligence should lead to virtue, right? That smart people shouldn't fall for hateful ideologies.
But the counter-argument presented is that intelligence is neutral. What matters are the unethical choices and harmful actions, regardless of someone's IQ.
Which also connects to the idea of cringe propaganda.
Explain that.
It's the use of deliberately awkward, unappealing, or emotionally overwrought messaging, often attributed to social justice movements, to alienate potentially sympathetic, but more, let's say, aesthetically sensitive or intellectually oriented people.
So the implicit message is, look how irrational and uncool these people are. You don't want to be associated with them.
Exactly. And often it plays on looks, too. The idea that if advocates aren't conventionally attractive or sexy, their views aren't legitimate. It's a way to dismiss substance based on style or perceived social awkwardness.
That's insidious. Shifting gears again, let's talk about Richard Spencer and his Russian ex-wife, Nina Kupriyanova.
A relationship full of contradictions. They had very different views on Russia, especially after the invasion of Ukraine. The FBI apparently questioned both of them about the other.
And their divorce was incredibly acrimonious, mutual accusations of personality disorders.
Kupriyanova has an interesting background herself, into black metal music. Spencer apparently had to check his email archives to even remember details of their early relationship and was surprised by how anti-American she seemed early on.
It's almost comical if it weren't so tangled up in serious issues. This relationship also touches on the theme of eugenics.
Right. Reeve connects it to its historical roots in America, often tied more to classism than just race initially. She mentions the infamous fabricated study of the Kallikak family as an example.
And figures like Theodore Roosevelt, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., respected historical figures, supported eugenic ideas back then.
But public perception has shifted. Now, eugenicists in documentaries are often portrayed as, Reeve puts it, gross, pathetic losers.
There were even attempts within white nationalist circles to rebrand, like proposing a name change to the Thomas Jefferson Society.
Which Bill Regnery apparently shot down. And organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center continued to label their gatherings for what they were, meetings of prominent racists.
Then there's Walter Kistler, the inventor and philanthropist. Late in life, he developed this interest in race science.
And started funding projects related to it, seeming quite naive and susceptible to grifters, according to the book. He co-founded the Foundation for the Future, worked on a book called Human Nature.
Spencer's view on that book project was cynical, wasn't it? Seeing it mainly as a way to keep donations coming from Kistler.
Yeah, it feeds into Spencer's general frustration with the movement's lack of progress, seeing it as just a racist add-on to mainstream conservatism.
And his dismissal of middle Americans as NPCs, non-player characters, lacking any real inner life or agency, just background figures in his drama.
That's incredibly condescending. Kupriyanova also offered a more nuanced view of Russia, apparently, contrasting with Spencer's simplistic idea of it as just a white city. She understood its ethnic diversity.
And Alexander Dugin comes up, the Russian far-right philosopher.
His influence is described as significant, connecting with activists across Europe and America. He's sort of ubiquitous in those circles.
Let's talk about the platforms themselves. 8chan. It started under Frederick Brennan.
Brennan, the same person who created WizardChan.
Well, involved with it. He started 8chan, but it quickly descended into this haven for extremist content, especially after what he called the golden era, before gamers and Nazis really mingled there.
Gamergate played a role too, right? Showing how online mobs could pressure advertisers?
Definitely. Brennan eventually resigned, and Ron Watkins took over, apparently with the tagline, "Embrace Infamy."
Which certainly set a tone. 8chan and 4chan before it are often cited as the origin point for a lot of the race science memes and talking points.
Users see themselves as these dispassionate intellectuals just engaging in debate.
But they react furiously when their often flawed science or logic is challenged. It's not really about open debate for many of them.
Spencer really tried to leverage this online energy after Hillary Clinton gave a speech condemning the alt-right.
He held that press conference, "What is the alt-right?"
Right. Emphasizing style, aesthetics, talking about unleashing a little chaos, adopting 4chan slang, the fashy haircut.
Kuprianova's take was that he craved the negative attention, wanted to be feared.
Spencer himself admitted something interesting about 4chan users. He said some initially engaged with identitarian ideas just to troll people.
But then they actually got convinced by the arguments themselves.
That's what he claims, suggesting it showed the truth quality of the ideas.
Or maybe they just got too invested in the joke, went too far down the rabbit hole.
That's the counter-argument Reeve presents. Spencer later seemed to realize the Chans just saw him as a dancing monkey, someone providing entertainment.
It shows the complex, sometimes self-deceiving relationship between the figureheads and the anonymous online masses. We also see stories of people pulled into the movement through personal relationships. Samantha Froelich.
Her boyfriend starts adopting these black-pilled white supremacist ideas, talking about the Day of the Rope, a neo-Nazi fantasy of mass killings.
Yeah.
She gets involved with Identity of Ropa.
But eventually becomes disillusioned, seeing it as a cult.
And then there's Lisa, who gets into this disturbing online relationship with an alt-right guy named Jody.
And she keeps trying to rationalize his abusive behavior, right? Maybe he's just memeing, maybe she doesn't understand the environment. Her messages to Froelich get increasingly desperate.
It's chilling. It shows how online dynamics can trap people in harmful situations. This all builds towards Charlottesville, doesn't it?
A major turning point. Heimbach apparently admitted that Jason Kessler, the main organizer, was glib about violence, and many in the alt-right weren't ready for real-world conflict. Heimbach even gave Kessler's number to Jeff Shoup for help with security.
Spencer, meanwhile, was described as euphoric beforehand, boasting about being worshipped, comparing himself to L. Ron Hubbard.
But later expressing regret, wondering if he even liked the people in his own movement.
And Elliot Klein, another figure, had his own ambitions, planning to use Spencer to gain power and then get rid of him once a white ethnostate was established. First against the wall was the phrase used.
So much internal mistrust and scheming, even before the event itself. There were disagreements within Identity of Ropa about their leader Nathan D'Amigo's messaging, worried it was counter-signaling other groups. Nobody really knew who anyone truly was online.
The Traditionalist Worker Party, Heimbach and Parrott's group, planned to march in a shield wall.
Supposedly for visual impact and protection, but Parrott saw it more as a way to stop shit from happening, a defensive posture.
Chris Cantwell is another key figure at Charlottesville. Klein casually mentioned how quickly he flipped from libertarian to fascist.
Cantwell comes across as incredibly volatile. He viewed his own anger as rational. He seemed to want Charlottesville to be a spectacle to provoke an emotional reaction.
He had past legal troubles, claimed libertarianism saved his life, but his rhetoric was extreme. During one interview around that time, he made horrifically racist remarks and chillingly said the fact that no one on their side died at Charlottesville was a plus.
Just appalling. And the torch march the night before the main rally.
The Jews will not replace us chant. Fred Brennan identified that as an 8chan slogan, making the jump to real life.
His interpretation was that they were performing for the online audience, trying to project power and growth back to the chants.
On the day of the rally itself, Reeve describes Heimbach panicking in a parking garage, terrified of violence. Parrott seemed less immediately worried.
Then the chaos unfolds. Cantwell gets maced. Counter-protesters clash with the rally-goers.
And then the horrific car attack by James Alex Fields, killing Heather Heyer and injuring many others. The media captured it all.
The immediate aftermath sounds devastating. Tanisha Hudson, a local activist, observed that this chaos wasn't just about a statue. It had been brewing for quite some time.
Spencer quickly tried to distance himself from Kessler, calling him rogue and weird, the beginning of the alt-right feeding itself.
Kessler faced an angry mob at his own press conference later. Provoking that kind of confrontation has consequences.
And Cantwell, even after everything, seemed utterly self-absorbed in interviews, repeating conspiracy theories, doubling down on vile racist and anti-Semitic comments.
Reeve also notes how some figures were angry with her during the chaos, feeling she prioritized getting interviews over their safety. A strange glimpse into their mindset.
The legal fallout was huge. The Science v. Kessler lawsuit, alleging the organizers intentionally planned racially motivated violence, leaked Discord chats were key evidence.
It put immense financial and legal pressure on the defendants. Heimbach still tried to deflect, blaming Fields' actions on Jew lawyers rather than the ideology itself.
Even Bill Regnery reprimanded Spencer for basically admitting defeat publicly, saying, "Uncle." Spencer argued the alt-right moment was over. Regnery agreed on a tactical refocus, maybe back towards publishing.
And Nina Kuprinova filed for divorce, citing Spencer's abuse and stating his racism endangered her and their children.
The Science trial itself, 4 years later, forced many of these leaders back together, at least legally, though some key figures like Klein and Robert Amador Ray were absent. Parrott and Heimbach found themselves aligned again out of necessity.
It wasn't just Charlottesville reverberating. The case of Alec Manassian, the Toronto van attacker.
He explicitly identified as an incel, influenced by 4chan's R9K board, the same one Fred was involved with.
The judge was skeptical about whether he was a true incel, concluding his main motive was notoriety. But the point was made, even if these beliefs start as irony or role-playing, repeated engagement and action make them real.
And then QAnon exploded, which Brennan and linguistic analysis traced back to 8chan and the Watkins family.
The whole landscape shifted after Charlottesville. Fewer big public rallies by the core outright groups.
Instead, you saw more street clashes between groups like the Proud Boys and Antifa, especially in places like Portland and Seattle during the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020.
It became more about direct confrontation, attracting people who seemed drawn to the spectacle of violence itself. A Proud Boys rally in Portland even honored a member killed by an anti-fascist, showing some continuity of personnel from the alt-right days.
Which leads us towards January 6, 2021.
An event viewed so differently, a historic humiliation of democracy by some, a righteous revolution by others, fueled by the Stop the Steal movement.
People like Pastor Greg Locke, J.R. Majeski were there, individuals who had expressed extreme views before. Reeve mentions getting warnings to stay away from the Capitol that day because of expected violence.
The motivations of the crowd seemed diverse. Many felt red-pilled by COVID lockdowns, then black-pilled by election fraud conspiracies, a belief that outsiders were brainwashed and drastic action was needed.
Then the storming of the Capitol itself, the clashes with police, the tear gas. Reeves notes the reality was different from what some might have expected based on, say, Portland protests.
And the intense hatred directed at media outlets like CNN by some in the crowd.
How did figures like Spencer and Parrott react to January 6th?
They were apparently appalled. They saw it not as the fascist takeover they might have once desired, but as delusion. The masses got red-pilled into something chaotic and, in their view, counterproductive. Spencer even claimed he was no longer a white nationalist.
It's ironic. Reeves reflects on the American cultural narrative. We like to see ourselves as the heroes fighting Nazis, referencing movies, history.
So maybe to convince Americans of something radically new, it's often framed as actually aligning with core American values rather than rejecting them, a kind of strategic framing.
Fred Brennan offered a sobering thought. The internet, once an escape, now dominates reality. And that shift accelerated dramatically around 2013.
And we saw how misinformation, like the election conspiracy, spread rapidly through platforms like Fox News after 2020.
Matt Parrott, looking back, seemed to feel they had contributed to something really fucked up and evil, even if they were too immersed to see it fully at the time. He felt even warning his past self wouldn't have worked.
He and Heimbach, reflecting later, acknowledged they were mixed up with the most despicable, evil, stupid motherfuckers in America. Heimbach trying to pivot towards Marxism, but still facing challenges due to his past.
The book suggests that even though the public face of the alt-right collapsed after Charlottesville and Jan 6, the underlying forces didn't disappear.
Right. There's been a shift in emphasis, maybe more towards masculinity, anti-feminism, but the general culture of 4chan, the trolling, the cynicism, has arguably seeped much deeper into the mainstream, especially influencing conservative discourse.
That comparison between alt-right trolling of social justice warriors and mainstream Republican complaints about wokeness, both framing certain viewpoints as irrational, emotional, illegitimate.
And you still see attempts by individuals from these movements to infiltrate mainstream conservative events. The ideologies persist even if the specific organizations falter.
Reeve ends with this anecdote about her father, calmly de-escalating a potentially explosive situation with reason and quiet confidence. A real contrast to the chaos documented throughout the book.
It leaves you thinking about different ways to respond to conflict and danger.
So we've journeyed through some really unsettling territory here, looking at online culture's darker side and its real-world impacts, guided by Elle Reeve's reporting in Black Pill.
It's a stark reminder of how complex online identity is, how powerful narratives can become even when starting as jokes, and why critically engaging with information is just so vital.
This has only scratched the surface, obviously. We really encourage you, if this has interested you, to read Black Pill for yourself and continue thinking about these crucial topics.
And remember to check out resources like Mindful Moments on YouTube, and of course our other discussions where we try to unpack complex ideas.
If you found this exploration valuable, please subscribe. Maybe share it with someone else who might be interested. There's a link to purchase the book in the show notes.
But most importantly, keep questioning, keep thinking critically about everything you encounter, whether it's online or offline. The lines are blurrier than ever.